Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to a very special episode of the show here on this Saturday evening. We got as a very special guest a fellow who I've been well aware of for quite a while. He does a very good job on his own channel, the Prog Corner. Welcome, Mr. Scot Lade, to Sea of Tranquility. What's up, Scott?
Hey, thanks, Pete. It's an honor to be on the Sea of Tranquility. Longtime fan, and it's kind of a big honor for me to be here sitting with you talking about prog rock. That's what I do. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I appreciate it, and this is a really interesting topic too, because we're not talking about our favorite albums today, or what could be the best albums today. We're talking about albums that in some way, shape, or form, touched a little deeper. It actually changed your entire life. That's cool. And it was
cool.
hard to come up with just 10.
Absolutely. And so, when I reached out to Scott saying, "Hey, I want to do something together," one of the things I thought about, obviously I wanted to do a prog episode because that's all you do on
That's what I do.
It's a chunk of what I do on my channel. I do lots of other stuff, but I love talking about prog because I love it so much. And I've always wanted to do, I always love the kind of the idea of music or albums or bands that just absolutely changed your life, that set you on a course that you've never looked back from, right? So, and you hit the nail on the head. This is not about our favorite prog albums.
Right.
These are not about the best or any of that kind of stuff, but these are the albums that really touched us, really changed us, and for me anyway, solidified my love for the genre of music. That's what it is for me.
And that's the power of music. There's really no other thing on this planet I can think of that can actually do that to you. Maybe reading a really good novel or something might do it for somebody, but I think a large chunk of your audience understands exactly what we're talking about here, about listening to an album and everything just changes. And that's powerful stuff. And so I'm excited to talk about 10 albums today that did in fact change the entire trajectory of my life. And that's a cool topic. So thanks, Pete. I don't know if you want to do your first one first, or if you're thinking chronological, or
I'll tell you how I frame mine, Scott.
Yeah.
And you're going to go first because guests always go first on SOT. I put them in a chronological order of when I discovered them. So
okay.
That's what I did. You can do it however. If you have a different order, that's fine too. But mine are going to be the first one that really changed my life, and then the most recent one that changed my life. So
okay, I'm doing chronological throughout, except there is one exception that I came too late, but I'm going to rank it chronologically. The other 9, I pretty much heard them when they first came out. And the first album that just absolutely changed my life, I lived in a musical household. We had all the Beatles albums. I was in love with Sgt. Pepper's and Revolver. And then my dad came home with this. I mean, you talk about Bizarro World on Seinfeld or something, man. I mean, the gatefolds, the outer sleeve, the insides, the outside, it's just insane. The Mothers of Invention, We're Only in It for the Money, 1968. It changed my whole perception of what pop music could be. This insane hippie from California doing all this crazy stuff from doo-wop to classical and bebop and jazz, and just what's going on here, man. Yep. And the songs on here, I still hum them in my brain while I'm falling asleep at night, and it's just insane because it's been 55 years that I've had this album in my life. And this one definitely changed my life. It warped this little kid's brain. I don't think it was probably fair that a 5-year-old got subjected to this, but that's what happened. And it changed my life for sure.
Yeah, that's not really music a 5-year-old you would think should be listening to.
Probably
but,
not.
Hey, you know what? Whenever is okay. So it's funny. Zappa didn't quite make my list. He was in, whenever I do these type of lists, I put together like a big list.
Oh yeah.
So Roxy and Elsewhere was in my bigger list. It didn't quite make the 10, but that was up for consideration for sure. So all right, so I'm gonna go, like I said, I'm gonna go in the order that I actually heard these. And so my number, I guess 10, or number 10, whatever the first choice here is the prog album, the first one that I ever listened to, and the first time that I ever heard a band that I thought was doing something a little bit different. And I have to credit my cousins Linda and Ann, who turned me onto this band and this album, because if it wasn't for them, I don't know if I would have heard it until much later on. And that album is Point of No Return by Kansas. And I remember thinking, you know, at the time, this was probably, I heard this in probably 78, maybe 77, because I think they bought this when it first came out. So it was somewhere around there. I was a huge Kiss fan, and I was into, like, you know, that kind of stuff. And I remember hearing this and thinking, wow, never thought I'd hear violin in rock music, right? This is pretty cool. And hearing, you know, stuff like Portrait He Knew and Closet Chronicles. Yeah, no. And thinking, wow, this is really cool. And of course, you know, before you know it, Dust in the Wind is like all over the radio, right? So it's like, okay, I remember hearing that, right? But I just fell in love with this. Is it my favorite Kansas album? You know, I actually went backwards after I got this, and Left Overture has become for me like that is the album. But I still have a really, really soft spot for this band and this album, and this probably is the first prog album I ever heard. And to anybody watching who will continue to insist that Kansas were never a prog fan, sorry, you're wrong.
Yeah, they're dead wrong. They need to listen to the first 6 albums from start to finish.
Exactly. And I know it's mostly folks from across the pond who make those statements. And
it is. I've noticed that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have the same argument about Styx, although a little more valid. Styx had only a few real prog albums. Kansas, those first 6 were prog. Straight Absolutely. Up. Yeah, there were a couple hits, but you know what? Yes, had hits too. It's okay.
That's it. You know, a prog band can have some hits. You know, the LP had hits as well. So yeah. So I get it.
That was an awesome pick. I love Kansas. My love for Kansas knows no bounds. My favorite's probably the first album, but Left Overture to me is just absolutely perfect from start to finish. It made my perfect prog albums countdown, because it is in fact perfect. But that's the thing about it, you know, emotionally we can feel different about an album, you know, how it actually, you know, oh, I love these songs and I like these notes versus, you know, what it's doing in your heart and in your head. And so I got my second pick. And it's kind of funny because you just talked about this one this morning, and we were just talking about bands that really aren't prog, but are they prog? And I contend that early Chicago is progressive rock. It's not capital P prog. You know, nobody's going to confuse it for, you know, Peak Yes or Genesis, but the arrangements, the trombone, trumpet, and sax arrangements on the first 7 or 8 Chicago albums, just mind-blowing. The side 2 suite on here, Ballad for a Girl from Buchanan, is a prog epic if ever there was one. And then you just got the absolute genius of Terry Kath tearing it up all over this album. I love it. You talked about how it's called Chicago 2 now. It's actually just Chicago, the whole transit authority thing. But I love this album. This was the first band that I claimed as my own. It was the first band I fell in love with. It had nothing to do with my mom or my dad or my friends or my older brother. Chicago was my band up until I discovered prog a little bit later when my older brother went away to college. But yeah, I was a ginormous Chicago fan. They were my favorite band for like probably 5 years.
Very cool.
And this is their best record, I think.
I mean, I go back and forth between that and the debut. For me, the last bunch of years, the debut kind of wins out a little bit more because I think there's even more great Terry Kath on that first album. Yeah, man, you can't go wrong with those first 2 albums. No, and I love the third album. I don't think it quite hits the highs of the first 2.
It's cool, but it's not quite there. But Chicago 5, when they decided just to trim it down and do a single album, finally, it's almost perfection. What a band. And then Chicago 7, all the jazzy, you know, trips they're taking you on that record. Yeah, they were my band until, like I said, until my brother went away to college and he started coming home with some stuff, which we're going to talk about in a minute.
There you go. Well, so I was the oldest, so I was always the one turning my brother onto stuff. He never quite latched onto this style of music, though. My brother has always been a metal guy, and that's really it. It's like whatever. So I couldn't really. He never really warmed up to some of this stuff, and especially this band here, which I generally don't like picking live albums when I do stuff like this, but I have to with this band because it's the first thing I ever bought from them. and I absolutely loved it then. And it's Seconds Out by Genesis.
Okay.
And how weird is it that the first Genesis album I buy is when Phil took over as the lead vocalist, singing not mostly, but a good chunk
a lot of
Peter
Gabriel
tunes, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of these songs I initially fell in love with hearing Phil sing them. So how weird is it that, like, Supper's Ready, which I loved right from the get-go, is not the original, right?
Yeah.
And then when I first heard Foxtrot, I was like, oh, that's a little different, because you're used to like Phil's slightly different inflection from Peter's, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I got to know some of this stuff with him on the vocals, but what's great is you have a good selection of stuff here from obviously Trick of the Tail and whatnot. So yeah, I love it. And I've told the story a million times, but I have a real sweet spot, and I'm a real sucker for albums that have live shots on them, on the front or on the back.
And what a live shot. If you were in a record store flipping those airport lights, that you're gonna stop dead in your tracks.
So I saw this, I'm going through G, and again, this is late 70s, right? Or, probably what, this 77, 78. And, I'm into Kiss and starting to get into Zeppelin and all this kind of stuff. So it's not like this is even music that I really listen to all that much. But I remember going through the G and this popping out, and the vinyl of this, the double album popping out. I'm like, wow, look at that. You got smoke machines and lights, and is that a double neck guitar? I gotta have it.
It's like one of the coolest stage
thing ever, right? So
it's just amazing. And then let's talk about Chester Thompson for a minute.
So good.
I mean, what a hard luck dude. He should have been allowed to join Genesis as a full-fledged member after Phil left. Yeah. But I'm happy to report that he is now a member of Unitopia. And they just dropped their new album, Seven Chambers, or it's fixing to drop. Oh, just amazing. I love that record. It's funny, you see polls. What do you prefer, the Foxtrot version or the Seconds Out version of Supper's Ready? And it does fall about 50-50. And I think it really depends, did you hear Seconds Out first? And a lot of people did.
Yeah.
And Phil nailed it. So what's not to love?
And as far as your comment about Chester, I mean, I've been of the opinion for decades that Chester and Daryl should have been recording albums with these guys. Years.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you don't have a guy like Daryl Sturmer in the band and just relegate him to doing some stuff live. When, no disrespect to Mike Rutherford, love him, but when you look at their guitar skills, there's a big difference there, right? Why not have Daryl Sturmer playing on those studio albums?
Absolutely.
And a little bit more zing. But
I was living on a boat when Steve Hackett quit the band. And my first Genesis show, I had no idea he wasn't in the band anymore. You talk about a real difficult job. Daryl Strummer had some proving to do to these ears, right? Because I was pissed off, man. There was no internet. I didn't know nothing. I hadn't gotten Seconds Out yet. And I was really not happy. And man, he pulled it off. What incredible talent, and what a class guy he is too.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you'll never hear him complain.
Yeah.
But he's got every right to.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to talk about my brother going to college. My third pick. He came back with a cassette. He comes back winter break. So this is December 1975. It's a Memorex 90. So it's got one album on side A, one album on side B. And this was on side A. Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Tarkus. And I don't think I was quite ready for it, but it was just mind-blowing. That side one suite, Keith Emerson's amazing keyboard skills, all these weird keyboard sounds that I hadn't really heard before. And then you just get the awesomeness of Greg Lake and Carl Palmer. This album was so cool. And, I'm a little kid still, man. It's got an armadillo that looks like a tank and is telling this cool story. I was all in. And yeah, Emerson, Lake and Palmer stole my heart probably in about 15 seconds into that cassette tape. And it's never changed. I mean, I love the band. I always will. Probably the most underrated band of all time. They've been forgotten about almost completely. History has not been kind to them whatsoever. But God bless Carl Palmer for keeping the legacy going, in spite of, both Greg and Keith having left us recently. But this album here, yeah, it changed everything for me.
such a great song. You know? It's like,
and I love side 2. A lot of people give side 2 a hard time, but I think the side 2 songs are dynamite. I think it complements what goes on side 1. It's a totally different kind of thing, but it's cool, man. And it changed this little kid's brain completely. Yes, so that was part 1 of that cassette, but something tells me side B will probably be my 4th pick.
Cool.
What was on the opposite side of that cassette tape?
All right, so I'm going to go fast forward into the very early 80s here, and again, by this point in time, I've moved on from my love for Kiss. I still listen to a little bit of Genesis, still listen to Kansas.
But then the Elder happened.
Yeah, well, I kind of, after Dynasty was kind of when I
okay.
I just outgrew them, right? But I started listening to like Deep Purple and Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath, just, it's not for this episode, but that's probably the single band that changed my life the most was Black Sabbath. And I'm listening to a lot of heavier stuff, right? So, but there's this band out of Canada that I had dabbled with a little bit. The band is Rush, and of course the album is Moving Pictures. So I already had All the World's a Stage, and I think I had Hemispheres, and maybe I had Permanent Waves. I don't quite remember. And I really liked them a lot. But this album just completely did it for me. And I listened to this constantly. I saw them on this tour, and I was all about Rush at the time. And again, this is an album that's kind of like, it's not quite as proggy as the previous couple, and it's kind of moving them into the new decade, but it still has enough of those elements. And man, it just made Rush an even bigger band in my heart and in my mind, and I've been an enormous fan ever since. And I followed them throughout all of the, I kind of lost a little interest in the mid-late 80s a bit, when they kind of got rid of the guitars and played up the synths.
A lot of people did.
Yeah, and I was listening to even heavier stuff. I got into thrash and whatnot. So for me, it was like, all right, I still like Rush, but that stuff is not that good. But Moving Pictures for me has always been, since it came out, my favorite Rush album, even though, Hemispheres is like nip it at the bud quite a bit. And I love all the 70s albums to death. But yeah, and the production of this, and funny enough, one real interesting thing is, and I'm sure you've done this with other big albums, it's like, there's always like that one side that's got like either the hits and the memorable songs, and you play over and over again throughout your life. And like the other side, it's like, that's really good, but you don't listen to it as much. And then you fast forward 40 years, and now when I go to play Moving Pictures, I'm like, I don't really need to listen to side 1 stuff. I want to hear the last 3 tracks.
Yeah, for sure.
I didn't play them to death back in the day. So for me,
Vital Signs was a little.
Yeah, and I hated Vital Signs back.
I know that was the one. Now it's my favorite.
I love Vital Signs.
I know, right?
Witch Hunt is so cool and dark and menacing, and Camera Eye is fun and epic and proggy. So
I was lucky enough on the Permanent Waves tour, 1980. They tested out Tom Sawyer and Limelight on 10 live dates.
Wow.
Just to see before they recorded it how it was going. Different arrangements, some different lyrics. I was lucky enough to see one of those. Fort Myers, Florida, 1980. And I knew that Rush was doing okay. But if you look at album sales, come on, they weren't really killing it. And I got the feeling after hearing those 2 tracks that, Rush was going to take it to the next level. Moving Pictures is absolutely perfect. It's the perfect distillation of everything Rush was, what they were at the time, and it even points to what they were going to become later on. It's marvelous. I love it. I love Rush. I love them. Ever since the day a little kid in school let me borrow 2112. I've been a lifelong fan. Love those guys. My 4th pick here is the opposite side of that cassette tape that my brother came home with on winter break 1975. And I'd been playing classical guitar since I was like 5 years old. My dad gave me an ultimatum: you're playing piano, you're playing guitar. So I've been playing classical guitar for quite a while. And when I heard those opening notes, a roundabout, and you hear the little classical guitar piece, Mood for a Day, it really clicked. Man, this album here, to these ears, I think it's the best sounding prog album. There's just something magical
Production's
about
great,
the sound in the room at AdVision, what was going on. Eddie offered finally had complete 100% control over the band and their sound. And the addition of Wakeman to the band probably didn't hurt a whole lot. How do you write Roundabout and Heart of the Sunrise in the same afternoon, which they did? Wakeman's first practice with the band. Give me a break, man. I mean, obviously, Wakeman picked correctly, going with Yes instead of Bowie, who invited him into the Spiders of Mars the day before. This album is perfect. Yeah. I mean, I got the artwork of it in my room. It's my everything. It's not my favorite Yes album, though. That will always be Tales from Topographic Oceans, but this one here changed everything for me. I knew this the second I heard this album that I was going to try to be a musician. And yeah, it doesn't get any worse than that, ruining somebody's life like that. He could have told me to become a doctor or a lawyer or something. How dare you? Ruined me. It ruined me, Pete.
Forever. More about Yes in a little bit, obviously.
I hope.
Yeah. How can it not be, right? So this is going to be a kind of interesting pick here. So we're fast forwarding now a couple of years. So I started college in 1984, and I think after my first year, which I lived in the dormitory, I moved into an off-campus apartment complex, and I had a real fun, crazy guy who lived next door to me who was a deadhead. And so one day, I went over. It was in the middle of the afternoon. We didn't have any classes, and I went over to his. He's like, "Oh, you want to come by?" And I'm like, "All right, cool." So I went over to his place, and we did a few things, and he put on an album. And I was in a cool frame of mind, and he put on an album, and I was like, there was no singing on it, and I was like, "What the fuck is this? This is weird and wild at the same time." And the guitar player was just kicking my ass. And he's like, "Oh, Pete, you've never heard the Mahavishnu Orchestra?" And I was like, "Mahavishnu Orchestra? I'm listening to Yngwie Malmsteen and Randy Rhoads and Richie Blackmore. I don't know no Mahavishnu. What? Who's that? Oh, that's that John McLaughlin guy? I've heard of him." And I was like completely floored.
I almost picked that. That was on the short list you were talking about.
Yeah.
Intermounting Flame. That was on my list.
I had never listened to anything like this.
No.
And this opened me up to the Dixie Dregs and Al Di Meola and Jean-Luc Ponty and Miles Davis and Return to Forever and all that stuff. So this was the first real fusion album I ever heard. And I absolutely had to have it. And I remember going out and buying like a beat up used vinyl copy because I was still buying vinyl at the time. And man, so good. And you know what? This is a prog album. It's labeled as a jazz fusion or jazz rock album. This is a prog album, folks. So
that one and Birds of Fire, the first two Mahavishnu albums with that original lineup.
Yeah. Mind blowing.
It doesn't get a whole lot better than that.
Right.
For sure. And I almost picked that. That's funny. That was probably like on my final list, one of my last scratch offs, you know. But you talked about going into a record store, and this is so funny how music is so generational, right? I had just discovered Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I'm going in the record store and I'm digging around, and I get to the G's and I see this. And I'm like, what in the world is this, man? There's one dude standing, the rest are sitting down. The dude who's standing's wearing a mask. He's got a kick drum in front of him. I don't know what this is. I've never even heard of this band, but I must buy it. The American label, very smart, putting this as a Best Buy price. I think it was like $3.99 or something like that. So I had a little bit of lawn mowing money. So I bought this, took it home. And from the first second I heard Tony Banks's Mellotron opening A Watcher of the Skies, I was done. I knew I had a new favorite band. And to this day, it's still Yes or Genesis for me. I don't really know who's my favorite. On the right day, Genesis is my band. But yeah, that album opened up my ears to the wonderful world of Genesis and everything that entails. And it was all because of the album cover, man. You know, and kind of like Seconds Out with You, where you saw those, those airport lights just illuminating the stage. This was almost the opposite. It almost looked like, that album cover looks like that's a world-beating band ready to.
And you look at that, it's like, oh, which local band playing at the
exactly. Some dude with the mask he just made the night before, some paper mache thing. Oh man, I never heard anything like it. I fell in love with that band, and that is my favorite live album of all time. I just adore it. I love the Sonics, and I just love the power and the energy of the band in 1972, 1973. Incredible. Phil Collins, the things he did with, a kick, a snare, a floor tom, one rack tom, a hi-hat, and one cymbal. That was it, man. Yep. And he sounded like he had 3 drummers with him. It's just insane. Yeah,
and a live album that should have been a double, because it should have had Supper's Ready and Salmasis on it, right?
They had enough material to do it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I would not have bought it that day. And hundreds of thousands of kids like me would never have bought it because it couldn't have had that nice price sticker on it.
Yep.
And so keeping it a single, keeping it dirt cheap, the same trick ELP did with Pictures at an Exhibition, put that nice price on it, that Columbia nice price on there. And I came home with a new record, so it was actually pretty smart. But yeah, in retrospect, we all wish it's a double album with Supper's Ready. And
in retrospect, they should have done a reissue of it and included the
there you go.
I mean, granted, you can find that stuff out there, and I have books and things like, but yeah.
Oh, that's an excellent call. They should have done that for its 50th anniversary.
Yeah. They should have done a lot of things.
Oh,
wow. Yeah, a great live album. I love it. Absolutely love it. I mean, I love that band. Genesis, generally speaking, you mentioned Genesis, and yes, Genesis generally inches out, yes, for me, not by much, because those 70s albums to me are just, every one of them are just like magical, and especially the Gabriel years are just, for me, it's just so good.
Perfect. Yeah.
All right. So
I can't find a fault in any of them.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, you're up.
I'm up. So again, I'm still in the 80s here. Although the next 2 albums did not come out in the 80s, but I discovered them in the 80s. So here I am, this metalhead into thrash and all sorts of metal and hard rock and whatever. And I started listening to a band called Jethro Tull. Why not? Of course, because growing up, rock radio station here, Poughkeepsie, New York, used to play Aqualung and Thick as a Brick and Skating Away on the Thin Ice of a New Day, and all sorts of other songs. And occasionally I would hear an excerpt from an album that contains only one song. So I decided to go out and buy the album, which is Thick as a Brick. Wow. And I was like, wow, a band that had the balls to basically do a 45-minute long song, and it's pretty heavy and it's pretty rocking. There's great guitar on here, and man, that Hammond organ is so crunchy. And I was a huge Deep Purple and Uriah Heep fan at the time. So I was like, this has got everything I love, and it's just as much fun as the stuff I heard on the radio. And before you know it, I'm buying, Aqualung and Stand Up and Benefit and all the 80s stuff. And it just started my lifelong journey with Jethro Tull at that point. But man, I can still listen to this any day and say, wow, that's just absolutely breathtaking. And I guess for me, this is really the album that made me open-minded to a band doing an album with just one song, basically, right? Because we've seen a lot of that in this genre over the years.
Oh, yeah.
And at the time, I would have been like, oh my God, I don't have the patience for more than 10 minutes, right? Deep Purple, Child in Time, it's about as long as I get, right? But when I first heard this and got into this, I was like, all right, this is actually really, really cool.
And the beautiful thing about it is it's one song. It hit #1 in the US. And then they follow it up in '73 with another one-song album that also hits #1 in the US. Oh, the 70s were just such a beautiful time. Record labels were so open to anything an artist wanted to do. The pressure was off. They weren't, hounding them for hit singles yet. And that's what you get. You get Thick as a Brick, A Passion Play. You get Close to the Edge. You get stuff like that. I absolutely adore Jethro Tull. To me, Thick as a Brick is the only, if I'm really being honest about my top 10 albums of all time, it's probably 5 albums from Yes and 5 albums from Genesis. The only one that has an actual claim to compete in that top 10 in my heart is Thick as a Brick, man. It's perfect. The last 90 seconds that orchestration that Dee Palmer puts in there right before the grand finale, from that point to the denouement, that's my favorite 90 seconds of music ever recorded.
Amazing, right?
Love it. Just love it.
Yeah.
Incredible. Incredible. So here's the one I'm going a little bit out of order and a little out of sequence. In the 70s, I knew about Italian prog. PFM had done a couple albums in English, and ELP was really pushing them on their Manticore label, but I didn't really like it. I could tell something was off, you know? And then I heard this. They never bothered to do this one in English.
No,
this
and I'm glad they did.
Museo Rosenbach,
No
Zarathustra.
No,
They're not kidding anybody. They don't care if you like it or not. This is one of the heaviest, darkest, meanest. If you like Mellotron and really distorted, ugly guitars and that raspy Italian singing that just doesn't give to, oh man, the controversial artwork is beautiful. This is the album that made me understand what all the hoopla about Italian prog was. I didn't get around to listening to this in the 80s, so I'm being a little anachronistic here, but it came out in 73, so I'm putting it in this position. And this album obviously changed everything for me because Italian prog is a big part of my listening every single day. I just fell in love with it after I heard this. And I just love Italian prog every bit as much as the stuff that's coming out of the UK and the US. Just such an amazing subgenre of prog that gets forgotten by a lot of people because, let's face it, the very best of Italian prog is in Italian. And some people don't want to hear it. Hey, I didn't want to hear it for years. I didn't want to hear any music that wasn't in English. I hated it.
And there's so many people who still won't listen to Italian prog.
And I get it. I totally understand because I was that guy for years. I was that guy until I heard that record. And then I'm like, I get it now.
Yeah, I didn't include any Italian prog in my list today, but because I discovered Italian prog probably late 90s.
Yeah.
But man, that Museo Rosenbach album, Il Balletto di Bronzo, PFM, Banco, and screw those English vocal albums. I never listen to those. I want to hear him singing Italian.
Absolutely.
Man, so many. I mean, that's just scratching the surface. There are tons of great Italian.
Vecchio Locanda della Fate, or Aria, Le Orme, on and on and on. Yeah, it's a deep well. There's so much great music. And the Italian prog scene is still going strong. A lot of great modern Italian prog bands out there. Yeah. So, yeah. And that's the album that opened me up to listening to all of it. So it opened up the floodgates to at least 1,000 new albums for me to listen to. Again, thanks a lot, man.
That's a great choice. All right. So after Thick as a Brick kind of opened up some doors for me, I discovered a couple of albums by a band that I was already listening to, but wasn't heavily into yet because for whatever reason, I don't know. What was the reason? I bought Drama when it came out. And I loved it. And I bought 90125 and I like that. But for whatever reason, I just never went further back. And then a buddy of mine who's a huge Yes fan said, "Oh, you haven't bought Close to the Edge yet?" And I was like, "No, I probably need to get that." But I got Fragile first. I really like Fragile. But then I bought this. And I've never looked back as far as my favorite Yes album. Relayer, for me, Relayer has almost gotten it many times. It has almost passed this album for me. But in the end, it's to this day, it remains my favorite prog album of all time. And it's just absolute perfection to me. So, someone sent me an email recently and they asked me, they're like, "Pete, what about doing a show or a topic on rearranging the Close to the Edge album and having like Siberian Khatru kick it off and You and I second, and then Close to the Edge finishing it out?" And I'm like, yeah, I guess. I wouldn't want to do it though.
Yes, did it live that way when they were doing their classic album series. They actually played Close to the Edge in inverse order. I disagree. I'm with you. It's perfect. Don't mess with it,
wouldn't,
man.
I wouldn't change it. I like having the shortest song last because,
Yeah.
and Siberian Catrue is one of my favorite Yes songs of all time. I love it, but I
Yeah.
love the fact that it's at the back end of the album. You got to wait to hear it, and then those opening, it's just like, oh yes, that's what I waited all this time for. And not that it was a struggle to wait, because Close to the Edge, the title track, is immense, and You and I is gorgeous, and Siberian Catrue is the kind of the rocker on the album, right?
Yeah.
So wonderful stuff, wonderful performances, and it's even more mind-blowing today to think that Bill Bruford was kind of bored and tired of the chaos and wanting to move on to something else after this of all albums, right? But that's the way history shows.
Yes, I actually get it. If the more you learn about Bill and you read his autobiography and you try to figure out inside what's going on inside the mind of a genius, he said when Close to the Edge was done, he's like, there's no way we can possibly ever top this, period. He called it the cookie. He's like, that's the cookie. I'm done. I kind of get that, I mean, for what Yes was all about and what they're doing, when I did my top 25 perfect prog albums, Close to the Edge was number one. Yeah, it's perfect. And Bill Bruford knew that. So he was going to get bored trying to chase something, chasing the dragon. Why not just go do something totally different, totally new?
Like I would think that Topographic Oceans would have drove him bananas. However, I think he would have loved to play on Relay.
Oh, he would have done a great job.
Yeah.
He would have done phenomenal. He's Bill Bruford. He would have done amazing. But Alan did incredible. I'm glad Alan was there for that. And all the 50 years of service Alan had with the band. But, the 70s wore on, and a lot of my favorite bands were starting to, get all weird and poppy and whatnot. And here's a controversial one for you. You're probably not going to agree with the prog bona fides of this one, but I was living on a boat, and whenever my dad would go away for business, he'd bring cassette tapes. He'd go in and tell the clerk at the store what his son liked, and he'd give suggestions. And he came back one time in 1979 with this.
Cool pick.
And I will always contend that XTC is a prog band. They're pop, but they're progressive pop band.
Yep.
And I'd never heard anything like this, with the two slashing guitars and total dissonance with all these weird rhythms. And then Steve Lillywhite and Hugh Padgham had figured out this weird sound on the snare drum. I'd never heard anything like it. No one had. It was the whole new thing, man, that you'd hear a whole lot about it in the 80s once Phil Collins got a hold of it on Gabriel 3 and In the Air Tonight. This is the first time you ever heard this drum sound. And this is the first time I ever heard XTC, and it changed everything for me. I realized you didn't have to write a 25-minute long epic to be epic, right? You didn't have to have a 18-minute long, synthesizer solo to be progressive. This band wrote 3-minute songs that were more progressive than anything off of Love Beach or Tormado, and then there were 3. And I have been a fan ever since. I love every album XTC ever did. I think they're a prog band. They are not listed in Prog Archives under any subcategory. So they, Talking Heads are there, Oingo Boingo are there, but XTC's not. Little head scratching. So I always take an opportunity to plumb for my third favorite band of all time. It's XTC, and I really, really think that's their best album, even though it's the first one I heard. And funny how that works a lot of times, right, Pete?
Yeah.
Because they have a lot of good albums, but I can't get off of that one ever.
It took me forever to get into XTC. I had a couple of friends who were like pushing them on me for years, and I'm like, I don't get it. I don't like it. It's not my cup of tea. And then one day I was like, I don't even remember. I heard a couple of their hits again after many years, and I was like, this is kind of quirky and weird. I kind of dig this, and it's kind of intricate. It's kind of proggy because it is. Maybe the more apt term is like art rock, which is
for sure
all over the place. Anyway. But then I started buying some stuff, and then I was talking to Martin Popoff one day. We were doing a show, and he's like, he goes, you ever listen to XTC much? And I'm like, yeah, I've been kind of getting into them after so many years of just just casting them aside. So we decided to do like an album ranking. So we spent a couple months work and listening on that, and then and I've been a fan ever since. And yeah,
they're
just
incredible.
a quirky, weird, fun band that had a lot of great songs and very different. And I like different, when a band does something completely unique. So and that's kind of progressive in my mind, I guess.
And you know what? Their number one influence on top of everything else, let's face it, they're Beatles-esque, right? And any band that takes their cues from the Beatles, I'm not probably going to hate, but they just took it to a whole different level. And I just love them. Always have. From the first second I heard them, I knew I'd found a new favorite band. And that's always exciting when that happens, because most of the time it takes a little while to get stuff to click, but that was immediate for me. So
finding a new band and finding a new favorite band is always great, especially when you find a new favorite band of a band that's been around for 40, 50 years. And you're like, how did I never listen to them back in the
day? With a big, huge discography that you can sink your teeth into. That to me is always exciting. Yeah,
it is. Absolutely. All right, so my next pick. So this particular band were never really all that big, but they had a name for themselves, and they came over here to America and they toured with a pretty big band for a bit. And I remember it was the tour of their third album. They actually played a local gig. So I was going to SUNY New Paltz here in New York in the Hudson Valley, going to college. It was the mid-'80s. And they were playing a little club date at a place called The Chance in Poughkeepsie, New York. And a buddy of mine said, hey, a couple of our buds are going to see this band Marillion this weekend. You want to go?
I thought so.
And I'm like, Marillion? Nah, I'd rather stay here at the dorm and drink beer and go to a party and all that kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I remember they went. And they came back and they were like, oh my God, it was so good. Fish was amazing. He wore all this paint on his face and they played they got this new album out called Misplaced Childhood. And I'm like, oh, all right, whatever. I didn't give a shit at the time. Right. So fast forward, like not that long afterwards. And all of a sudden I kind of caught the bug of this band. I remember seeing them in Kerrang magazine and I'm like, oh, if they're in Kerrang, they got to be heavy, right? Because I was a little too heavy at the time. So I went out and bought Clutching at Straws. And fell in love with this. And of course, then I discovered that Fish was no longer in the band anymore. I'm like, oh no. But yeah, I mean, I love all the Fish era albums, love them. But something about this one has always really spoke to me because it's kind of somber and autobiographical. And it's, there's just some songs on here that just completely speak to me. And I think this has got Fish's best vocal performance of any album. And I love the guitar playing of Rothery, and I'm a sucker for concept albums. And it made, and then of course I went backwards and bought all the other ones and just completely loved them as well. But it was interesting for me, not to sidetrack the conversation, but it took me a while to warm up to Hogarth because I love this so much. Now, that has softened quite a bit, and I love the Hogarth stuff, most of it anyway. And but yeah, to me, this was a game changer, and this got me ready for everything that was going to come in the '90s from the British bands, right? Because this had a little bit of Genesis to it, right? But I wasn't listening to IQ or Pendragon or Palace or any of those bands yet. So this kind of warmed me up to a lot of the neo-prog stuff that was coming right around the corner. So yeah, Clutching at Straws.
That's a good call. That is a fantastic call. I love the Fish stuff. But then when H joined, I did not like Season's End or Holidays in Eden. So I gave up. What an idiot, because the very next one was Brave, which was just incredible. I didn't hear Brave for 5 years until after it came out. And then I started to realize maybe the Steve Hogarth era stuff's okay. Oh, it's pretty good, man. I'm a big fan. I love both eras of Marillion. What a cool band. Yeah. As prog got less and less important in my life, I discovered the Clash and the Ramones and the Sex Pistols and the Damned and the Dead Boys, and I started becoming a punk. And I was really into the punk rock. But then in 1981, Robert Fripp comes up with a new version of King Crimson, and I'm calling all my punk rock friends. I'm like, dude, you got to hear this, man. And Discipline came out, and it changed the game. It gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, that there was going to be life after the 70s for my beloved genre. Discipline was such a fresh take on prog rock that you could take different influences and still be progressive. It helps when you got a guy like Robert Fripp at the helm. You're going to give him a little bit more leeway than probably most other band leaders, because we trust Robert to never lead us astray. But this album, man, they were on Fridays. Remember that TV show on
I do. I remember that. Yep.
And I remember, I didn't know they were coming on, and I'm just flipping, and King Crimson's on. I'm on the phone calling all my bandmates. I'm like, man, Crimson's on. You got to see it. Incredible. Tony Levin, what a great addition to the band. Adrian Belew, and of course, just Bill taking it to a whole different level, coming up with some different type of rhythmic things that I'm still trying to figure out. It's just overlaying different. Oh, the left channel's 13/8, and this is 17/8. Come on, man. And it all sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was on my list of honorables for sure, because that was the first King Crimson album I ever bought.
Wow.
And I remember being totally into that.
Oh,
but I think I didn't get the real bad King Crimson bug till much later on. I always liked them, but for some reason, and I don't really, Scott, I don't know what it was that made me appreciate King Crimson even more. I think it was seeing them live for the first time.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden I developed this ridiculous love for the 70s albums that has only increased more with age. I mean, man, like, Red and Larks and Starless and Wake Up Aside and the first album and all those albums in the 70s, I can't get enough of now.
Yeah, I love them.
Really, Crimson kind of really, really made their impact on me much, much later, even though I always liked and enjoyed them. But sometimes I always say better late than never, right?
Exactly.
And same thing with like Van de Graaff. Like I kind of ignored Van de Graaff for many, many years, and I really didn't start getting into them heavy till probably like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Well, being American, let's face it, you grow up in a certain era, you're going to be impacted by what corporate America wanted you to hear, and they sure didn't want you to listen to Van de Graaff Generator or Camel or Caravan. And I'd seen those bands' records, but I didn't listen to them in the 70s, because I wasn't being told that I should listen to them. They never got any airplay. Nobody talked about them. So I think we're a victim of that a little bit. And then, of course, later on, once you get older and you have a little bit of money to spend, you can go back and buy them old records, which is, what I did all through the 80s. And, then I just kind of got tired of everything going on and so-called progressive music. And I was just a punk rocker for a long time. And it really took something very special to 100% bring me back into the prog fold after almost 20 years in the wilderness. And then in 2000, Mike Portnoy gives Neil Morris a call, or this is probably in 99 that call was made. Portnoy had been talking about Neil's band Spock's Beard, and they enlist Pete Trewavas and Roy Stolten. We get the first Transatlantic album, and boys and girls, your boy is right back into the prog rock fold, because I had heard Spock's Beard. They're all right. I liked them. I had heard the Flower Kings, and I wasn't crazy about H era Marillion, but this album made it all make sense to me. After this, of course, I went back and bought every Dream Theater album, every Flower Kings album, every Spock's Beard album, every H era Marillion album. And this might be the most important album well, at least in the history of the Prog Corner. Without this album, there would be no YouTube channel for me. I wouldn't be listening to prog probably if it weren't for this album. It's that important to me. I love Transatlantic, all 5 albums. I seriously hope they're not done. Hopefully one day they'll find some time to, do some work again, because all 5 of their albums to me are just 10 out of 10. I love it. And that album just is so important to me as a result.
I saw them live at Nearfest when they released that first album. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. All right. So you just mentioned this band, my next pick. So we're going to move into the 90s now. And I remember, like, shortly before this album came out, so I graduated college in 88. in 89, I would still go back to college to visit my buds who were still there, right? And I remember one specific party hanging out, and this guy I knew, Dave, was from Long Island. He goes, "Oh, you gotta check this out. I know you're a big Rush fan." He starts playing me this album by this Long Island band, and it was Dream Theater, When Dream and Day Unite. And I'm like, wow, that's really good. Yeah, I'm not crazy about the singer, but the music is great. You know, it's like, oh, they're great. You're going to hear a lot about these guys. I'm like, okay, whatever. Fast forward like 2 years, right? And I never heard another word about Dream Theater. I forgot all about them. And I was briefly living at my parents' house in between like apartments and things. And I was in the shower one day and I was listening to Z-Rock. It was an all metal radio station at the time. And I heard this song called Pull Me Under from this album.
And all of a sudden, the vocals sound a little better too.
I'm like, wow. So first, I didn't know who it was because they didn't say who it was at first. I'm just hearing this song, and I'm like, it's heavy, it's progressive, it's long, there's cool keyboards, and I'm like, blazing guitar solo, singer's really good, and I'm like, wow, what is that? Like a new Fates Warning song? Or I didn't know, right? And then it's like, that's brand new from Long Island's Dream Theater on Atco Records, Images and Words. And I'm like, oh, that's that band that Dave was talking about. I'm like, wow, that doesn't sound anything like what I heard, you know? And I went out and bought this like immediately afterwards. I've seen Dream Theater live more than any other bands.
Really?
Close, 25 times at least. I've seen them on almost every single tour. I've got all their albums. Good friends with Mike Portnoy now. I've been lucky enough to interview most of the guys in the band here on the channel, and I just love their music. And they've got their great. And it's not my favorite album. I have others that I like more, but it's still the one that really got me. You know, the early 90s for me was really weird because I was such a metalhead all throughout the 80s. And then the 90s was weird because you had grunge and alternative and dance music and hip hop and all this other stuff that was becoming more popular, and metal kind of went into the underground, right? So that's when I really got heavily into prog and prog metal because I still liked adventurous music and heavy music, but I really wasn't liking the direction of where all the popular shit was going. So this band then opened me up to like, you know, so many other groups like Symphony X and Pain of Salvation eventually, and Threshold and all this other stuff, and really was a game changer for me. And this also helped me get completely into prog, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But yeah, so Images and Words, total game changer for me.
Well, incredible. Metropolis, probably, you know, Scenes from a Memory, probably my favorite Dream Theater album. But
that is my favorite.
I'm the guy that really liked The Astonishing, so you know, I just think they're incredible. I don't have a problem with anything in their discography at all. But, you know, being a big XTC fan and being a big Genesis fan, I guess it shouldn't be a big surprise that when Dave Gregory from XTC joined Big Big Train, and Nick DiVirgilio joined, and some singer who auditioned for Genesis but didn't quite make the cut thanks to Ray Wilson being awesome, a guy named David Longden, The Underfall Yard from 2009. If ever there was a band that was kind of like specifically designed for me to like them, like in a laboratory or something, and you come up with a formula, and this is the band for me, man. I mean, I just couldn't believe it when I was reading about it. And then when I actually heard these songs, I was like, okay, all right. Somebody just infected my brain with perfection, and I've been a huge Big Train fan ever since. I just love these guys, and David Longden's death really got me pretty hard, I gotta say. And I know when a band has really gotten in my heart when every single lineup change hurts, right? It's like, no. I mean, that's when with most bands, like, oh, okay, they got a cool new guitar player with it, but then. Yeah, that's me with Big Train right now, where I just, I'm so into everything that they're doing right now. New lead singer from PFM sounded great. Yeah, I'm excited. I think they are a real leading light in modern prog, and that album right there changed what I thought about modern prog. It really did.
They're one of those bands that they've been around for a while, and I've always heard about them. But, again, there's just so many bands to listen to. So I got into them really late, and I got to give the band and their management credit because they kept reaching out to me, wanting me to review and talk about their stuff here on the channel. I was like, all right, I know of the band. I've never listened to them, so let's do that.
They're called
I'm really happy they did.
You can't get excited about that. we're Americans. That doesn't mean anything to us. I guess it means something if you were born in the UK. It's like a toy, manufacturer or something that they all know about. We don't know what that means. It just sounds lame.
Yeah.
I didn't want to listen to them either.
But now that I have, I mean, they're a really unique band, and I think I really like a lot of the stuff they've done. And now that he's passed away, like I listened to their most recent thing that they released, and I'm like, oh man, he was so good, so good. I mean, he's got that kind of like Gabriel inflection in his voice, and
I think he's like a marriage of Gabriel and Collins, which
is
kind of cool. I hear
much.
a little Phil, I hear a lot of Pete. Just such a great vocalist, an incredible songwriter, super front man. But the band persevere on. They're not giving up. They're going strong. And so that's exciting. I love Big Train. All the best to them. I guess they're working on a new album. So
yeah, which I can't wait to hear. I think that'll be really cool. Yeah,
it'll be interesting.
See what direction they go in here. Yeah.
Alberto Brevin has got a completely different voice.
And that's the cool thing, right? He sounds nothing like Dave. So this will be interesting to see where they go. Yeah.
Good for them. Yeah.
All right. So the next album for me is a 70s band that I didn't get into until the 90s. And again, they were part of my prog renaissance in the early mid 90s. And, at this point in time, I'm like, all right, so there's all this new stuff coming out. We'll get to one of them in a minute, but there's still these 70s bands that I never really got into. I've dabbled in Yes and Genesis and the ELP and a lot of the big bands, Jethro Tull and Pink Floyd and all that kind of stuff. But I always heard about these kind of like second tier bands, right? Your Camels, your Van de Graaff Generators, and your Gentle Giants. I went out and I would start, because again, and you remember this is the beginning of the internet days, right? So all of a sudden you're starting to go onto the internet, you start to go on these message forums and these review sites are popping up. And I remember reading, and I got a couple books about prog, and I'm reading all the stuff about how Gentle Giant was one of the heavier of the 70s UK prog bands and the most complex with these ridiculous time changes and all this, the arrangements and whatever. And I'm like, all right, that sounds completely up on my alley. So I went to a Tower Records one day in Nanuet, New York, and I bought Three Friends, the first album, Octopus, and Acquiring the Taste, all in one shot, because they were all the best price, the sticker on, they were all like $7.99 or something like that. And they were all on the same label and whatnot. That's awesome. And I bought them all, and I remember bringing them home and playing them. I'm like, what the fuck is this? It's like, what did I do taking a chance on this weird stuff? I don't know if I get this or not. So I kept listening, and and then occasionally some songs would grab me. And the first song that really grabbed me was Peel the Paint, because that's like one of the heaviest songs they ever did. I'm like, holy cow, that's smoking. I love that. That guitar solo, that riff. Oh, I love it. And then you start letting Prologue and School Days and Working All Day, and then Octopus totally grabbed me. But really, it was this album that was the one that made my mind go, okay, you are processing this. You like this. And I'm like, I love this actually. And that has started a almost 30-year love affair with this band that I can't get enough of. And I went out and got all the other albums really, really quickly. And then of course, but they were only around for 10 years. They're not going to play anymore, and they're not going to do any more albums. Wah. And, but I to this day, I have a hard time. Everybody asks me, what's your favorite Gentle Giant album? Well, it's Freehand, it's Octopus, it's In a Glass House, it's this. And those are the ones that always rotate. But is the one that made me a huge fan, and still the one that I think is the most special here, is this one.
Three Friends. Yeah, my love affair.
It had the same cover as the first album.
I know. Bad management. It's what happens when you're on different labels in the US and in the UK. I mean, they didn't even want to release In a Glass House in the US. That's how poorly they were getting handled by the label here. My love affair with Gentle Giant also began at a record store, Peaches in Fort Lauderdale, back in probably like 78. Yeah, probably. And I'm in there, and the guy knew what kind of music I listened to. And he's like, you ever heard of Gentle Giant? And he handed me Octopus and Freehand. And I'm like, no, I'll take them both. And yeah, I just instantly fell in love with Gentle Giant. What a band. What an incredible band. But Here we go. We're at the final pick here, Pete. This is exciting. This is exciting because we're getting closer and closer to today's age. I mean, how can a record change a dude who's in his fit? Well, I'm 60 now, but when this hit, I probably bad at math, 55 or whatever. In 2017, this band out of Norway put out their fourth album. And I like modern prog, but I always felt there was no possible way anybody could put out an album as good as Yes or Genesis or Jethro Tull did back in the heyday. And I was dead wrong. Wobblers from Silence to Somewhere is that album. It's one of those pure perfect albums. I wouldn't change one note on this record. I love everything about it. And obviously it opened up the entire floodgates for me to just fall in love with Norwegian prog.
Oh, yeah.
Well, just Scandinavia in general. But for some reason, Norway in particular, there's so many bands up there that I just adore these days. Jordio and Tusmork and the Chronicles of Father Robin, and on it goes with Gazpacho and Airbag. And yeah, so it just opened me up to at least 100 new bands that I was listening to a little bit. Now, all of a sudden, I can't get enough of it. So again, thank you, Wobbler, for taking all my money. It's not cool. When you fall in love with a band or a whole subgenre, it's usually going to hurt you in the wallet a little bit. And
yeah.
But hey, love ain't free, man.
So I often get asked, Pete, what's your favorite prog band of the last 20 years? And I don't have to think more than a half a second, and it's Wobbler.
Yeah.
So when I came to my final pick for today, I was like, I had two bands in mind, and they're both Scandinavian bands. And I ultimately went with the one that went back just a little bit further to when I first discovered them. And it wasn't Wobbler, but they would have been, if we did 11 here, they would have been number 11.
Sweet.
But my number 10 was Anglagard. So of course I discovered Hybris. They were already done as a band at the time, so I didn't discover. So they've released Hybris, Epilogue, and the live album. What that was 93, 4, and 5, something like that.
Right around there.
Somewhere around there. So I think I discovered Anglagard in 95 or 96.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I heard this album, I was like, because again, we were just talking about Gentle Giant and how mind-boggling that stuff is. This stuff takes what they were doing, what Jethro Tull was doing, what King Crimson was doing, what Yes and Genesis were doing, throw it on the blender, take the top off, it comes flying out, and you kind of catch it, and you're like, wow, the musicality here is just off the charts. And I even didn't mind the kind of weird Swedish vocals. I didn't really think they belonged, but the music is just like, there's all this shit going on, the flute, the mellotron, the organ, the guitar. It's just like, this is great. But yet when you listen to something like this, this is really niche music. And you listen to it, you're like, if I were to walk up to like 10 people out in the street and let them listen to a 5-minute clip from this album, probably all 10 would hate it, right? So someone like people like us, this is magical.
I love Anglagard.
And seeing them live that one time at Nearfest was like, it was amazing. And then they put out a third album.
The spin-off band, all Traps on Earth.
That's really good too.
That was dynamite.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan. And honestly, you hear all those little influences and stuff, but I think the reason I fell in love with Anglagard was I detected something else in their music. I detected this really weird, obscure U.S. prog band called Cathedral and their album Stained Glass Stories. And I heard it, man, and they actually have gone on record and credited that album as being an influence on them. Yeah. And I totally hear it, and I fell in love with that album. So the first time I heard Anglagard, it was love at first hearing, for sure. I love all three albums. I think all three of them are 10 out of 10. Yep. I can't pick a favorite. Maybe I take a point away from Hybris because of those vocals, and Epilogue and Viljan Ogra are all 100% instrumental. Maybe I prefer that a tad bit, but we're splitting hairs, man. What a band.
I ranked this catalog like a year ago, and I put this at number one, even though the vocals aren't great, but the compositions are just like mind blowing.
It's
And
incredible.
that third album is amazing. Right. It's like there's no sophomore or third album slump at all with this band. And it's like I think we're all, because I've heard rumblings that they might do another album or something.
They've got a new lineup.
Yeah.
So they just reformed with the new lineup. Matthias Olsson's back in the band after being gone for about a year or two. So there is some hope. Yeah. No Anna Holmgren, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
Yeah. Well, what are you gonna do?
What can you do, right? I love Angligard. What a band. What a great pick. I'm glad we ended this with Wobbler and Angligard showcasing some great Scandinavian prog. And
which, there's a moral to the story, right? So for those of you watching who maybe only really know the big bands that we talked about,
right,
and these more obscure bands, you're kind of like, don't go listen to them, because these bands are just as exciting as a lot of the legendary ones that we've talked about today. And the hope is that some of you might have a life-changing experience listening to some of these.
That's right. That's the idea.
Right? That's what it's all about, right? Because I remember, I'm just as guilty as anybody else. The first time I listened to Angligard, I was like, Swedish band, and then I hear it, and then hearing the vocals, I'm like, but that music. And then before you know it, it's grabbed the whole of the brain, and there's no letting go. And I've discovered so many other bands that, either are not from North America or even Europe and whatnot, who play amazing music with or without vocals in their own tongue, that is just as exciting as some of the big favorites.
But you see, you mentioned something really important, and that is the frame of mind you were in at the particular time you heard this or that record for the first time, or this or that band. You got to be open to something different and something new. And I think that's really the function I try to perform on YouTube is, I get all my numbers when I talk about what's going on from the 70s and my Yes episodes and stuff, but I will always go to bat for the new bands with new album reviews, because I really think if people understand that there's still great prog being made in 2023, they're going to get themselves into that mind state that we were just talking about. There's where you can find your new favorite band. When you're open to it and just keep your mind available. And I think most of our audiences are folks like that, people that love music and it's a big part of their life for whatever reason, an outsized place in our life for whatever reason. And prog rock is obviously the albatross around my neck. But, Pete, I just want to say again, thank you so much for the invite. Guesting on Sea of Tranquility, a big honor. I really appreciate it.
Well, it was a blast having you on here, Scott.
It was fun.
You had talked. Do you want to mention where folks can find you on the Prog Corner?
I am Scott from the Prog Corner. You can find me on YouTube, the Prog Corner. We're on the other socials, but I'm a YouTuber, man. I don't spend any time on Facebook or Twitter or anything. I have pages, but just go to the YouTube page. And I've been doing this for 18 months now, and I've actually been amazed at the response. I didn't think 5,300 people would hit that subscribe button in the first 18 months, but here we are. It's pretty exciting, and all we talk about is prog rock. It blows my mind, and it's been going really good. So it's given me confidence that we could even do more. We could even raise the awareness of my beloved genre even more. And that's my mission, Pete.
There's a lot of fans out there. I mean, that's the thing. I'm amazed. We only do here on the channel one dedicated prog show, which is in the prog seat on Tuesday nights. But I review lots of prog albums, and I try to squeeze it in wherever possible. And it's kind of weird how Sea of Tranquility is set up, as because we do a lot of metal, a lot of hard rock, a lot of prog. We do all these different things, and there's folks who come to the channel who really don't care about the metal and the hard rock stuff. They only want the prog, and vice versa. The metal people who don't like the prog, but there's a good chunk of people who like all of it
that will watch it all. Exactly. Whether it's Pete. And he's got a cool panel. Maybe I'm not totally into this subject. Maybe I will be by the end of the episode. And I think a lot of people are like that. And that's what we're trying to do. Just get people energized and excited about the stuff that's cool and worth your time, energy, and money. And there's a lot of prog rock out there that is absolutely worth people's time, worth their energy. And yeah, it's kind of my mission to spread the gospel of prog. And I guess I've kind of become the face of prog rock on YouTube, which is just weird. I didn't anticipate it, but the response has been amazing, and I really appreciate, again, being on the Sea of Tranquility. You are the king of what we do here on YouTube. So thanks again.
Thanks for coming, Scott. I love having you on here. So go give Scott some love over on the Prog Corner, and visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube, all together, all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button before you leave. So we'll see you real soon here. What do we got coming up on the channel tomorrow morning, as a matter of fact? Louis Nasser coming into the show. We're going to be ranking the albums of Pete Townshend's solo career. So 6 albums. See you guys tomorrow. For Scot Lade, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.